The 4,739-ton Shorogan Maru was meant to be an easy prize for the USS Rasher, a submarine already building a reputation for deadly accuracy. Commander Hank Munson.com and Confident ordered the launch of a Mark 14 torpedo. On paper, this was a simple shot almost routine for a crew that had already faced greater dangers. But in war, the smallest mistake can turn into a life-threatening crisis. In the forward torpedo room, a young operator's hand slipped at the worst possible moment. The purge valves, which should have closed instantly after launch, stayed open, just a fraction of a second too long. That tiny delay was enough for a surge of icy seawater to blast inside, slamming into the operator with such force it nearly swept him off his feet and drowned him where he stood. The moment the torpedo left the tube, Rasher lurched forward violently, almost like she had been yanked by some invisible force. Her bow angled steeply downward, and she began an uncontrolled plunge into the dark depths below. Sailors were thrown against steel bulkheads, some bruised, others struggling just to stay upright. Alarms erupted in a shrill, unbroken scream, and the steel hull moaned under the strain as water pressure increased with every foot they sank. Munson gripped the cold metal of the control room rail, eyes locked on the depth gauge. The needle swept past the 300-foot safety limit without slowing. He barked the order to blow the main ballast tanks, the emergency maneuver that could force the sub back toward the surface, but the Rasher was sinking to fast gravity, momentum, and pressure dragging her down like an anchor. At 400 feet, the hull groaned with a deep, drawn-out sound that made every man on board tense. It was as if the submarine itself was trapped in the jaws of some unseen predator. Munson knew that if the descent didn't stop soon, the metal skin of the Rasher would start to give way. A bitter thought crossed his mind, one inexperienced crewman had come closer to destroying his boat than the entire Japanese Navy had managed. The gauge crept toward the 500-foot mark, dangerously near the point where the hull could be crushed flat by the sea. A faded, rusty tag near the gauge reminded them of the unthinkable hull crush depth. In that moment, every man understood just how fragile the line was between survival and disaster beneath the waves. The men of the Rasher were products of both old and new worlds. The skills they used to survive came from centuries of seafaring tradition, but the tools they relied on, radar, sonar, precision-engineered torpedoes, were the height of 1940s technology. Every successful strike was a marriage of ancient mariner wisdom and modern wartime innovation. That same spirit combining the best of the past with the breakthroughs of the present can be seen in The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization, a remarkable work created by artists, scientists, architects, and designers from across the globe. This is no ordinary history book. Inside are over 400 pages filled with painstakingly hand-drawn illustrations, some resembling medieval engineering sketches, others looking like the precise technical diagrams of a modern design lab. The book's thick matte art paper and striking, laminated cover make it not just an educational tool, but a work of art worthy of display. It appeals to both experts and casual readers, bridging the gap between historical curiosity and practical knowledge. It's the kind of gift that fits any occasion, perfect for a dedicated history enthusiast, a curious friend, or even someone who seems to own everything already. Packed with survival wisdom drawn from ancient times and adapted for the challenges of the modern world, the book has become a bestseller, showing the huge appetite people have for this kind of knowledge. Through World War II, on TV, it's even available at a discount, 10% off with the promo code WW20NTV10. Simply by following the link in the description. As for the USS Rasher, she was still a newcomer to the war. Belonging to the promising Gatut of submarines, she had been built in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and launched on December 20, 1942. Underneath her sleek exterior, she was a deadly predator, equipped with 6 forward torpedo tubes and 4 aft. In total, she carried 20 21-inch Mark 14 torpedoes, and she could sprint across the ocean's surface at 21 knots, or cruise silently beneath it at 9 knots. But new technology alone doesn't win battles. It takes time and experience. Rasher's first real chance to prove herself came almost a year later. On October 9, 1943, she left Brisbane, Australia, under the command of Edward S. Hutchinson. His assignment was clear: seek and destroy Japanese shipping near Ambon, Indonesia, a region vital to enemy supply routes. In the small hours of the morning, at 12:30 a.m., the radar gave its first alert, a blip that quickly turned into two. 2 Japanese freighters were moving through the darkness, their paths unpredictable and restless. Hutchinson recognized the evasive zigzag pattern instantly. It was a tactic perfected by Japanese captains to make stalking submarines lose their firing solution. These ships were expecting danger and doing everything possible to make themselves hard to hit. Still, Rasher tailed them, shadowing every turn in the black water. More than once, Hutchinson thought he had the perfect shot, imagining where they would be in a few minutes, but he held his fire, determined to get even closer. Patience, he knew, could mean the difference between a clean hit and a wasted torpedo. When dawn broke, the first light revealed the two merchant ships clearly through the periscope. They had no idea a predator was trailing them, ready to strike. In a low, calm voice, Hutchinson ordered the tubes made ready. He calculated their speed, adjusted the firing angles, and gave the quiet command. Fire 1, fire 2. One after another, 6 torpedoes roared from their tubes and sped away through the cold waters, leaving only a trail of bubbles between the hunter and his prey. The crew held their breath, every man tense as the torpedoes cut through the black water. 4 of them streaked past the target, disappearing into the dark without so much as a splash to mark their miss. But to ran true, finding the Convoy and slamming into her midsection. A heartbeat later, the explosions tore through the ship's hull, sending shudders from bow to stern. The 3,132-ton freighter seemed to twist under the force before beginning to list heavily to one side. Seawater poured in with terrifying speed, gurgling and roaring through the torn steel. Her crew scrambled in panic, some leaping over the rails into the churning sea to escape the flooding holds. Nearby escort vessels, caught off guard and unable to pinpoint the submarine's position, began dropping depth charges in a blind frenzy. Great plumes of water erupted all around, but they exploded into nothing but empty sea. The Rasher, already slipping away into deeper waters, left behind only a trail of bubbles and the chaos of the sinking ship. Through the periscope, the men watched the Convoy's stern rise, then vanish beneath the surface. The excitement of a successful strike rippled through the submarine, but so did the sober awareness that every victory brought new risks. The Rasher had proven herself, but the war ahead would test her again and again. By the end of October 1943, the submarine had notched her first kill, and fresh orders arrived to keep up the pressure on Japanese shipping. The South Pacific at that time was a hive of enemy transport activity, with vessels constantly shuttling troops, fuel, and supplies between scattered island bases. Hutchinson had been given one of the most dangerous hunting grounds in the theater, the Macassar-Strait-Celebes corridor. This was no simple patrol zone. It was a tight network of shipping lanes heavily guarded by destroyers, patrol boats, and constant air reconnaissance. Every approach route was dangerous. Every attack carried the risk of being boxed in and destroyed. It was a heavy responsibility for a crew still considered new to the fight, but Hutchinson wasn't one to ask for safe waters. On the afternoon of October 31st, at precisely 2:30, the sharp-eyed lookouts on Rasher's bridge spotted the thin vertical lines of a ship's masts far off on the horizon. As the haze cleared, they could make out the low, heavy shape of a tanker. The vessel's decks were nearly level with the waterline, signaling that her holds were full, most likely with crude oil. Such a cargo was precious to Japan's war machine, making the tanker an irresistible target. The problem was that Rasher couldn't close in. A Japanese floatplane buzzed lazily overhead, circling the tanker like a watchful hawk. Hutchinson had no choice but to hang back, shadowing from a safe distance of about 7 miles. For more than 5 tense hours, Rasher followed her prey through the swells. Inside the boat, the men moved quietly, aware that the slightest sound could betray them if the floatplane's crew spotted a hint of periscope wake or caught an unexpected glimmer of sunlight on metal. Patience became their weapon. Finally, at 7:30 in the evening, their luck turned. The floatplane peeled away, heading for base to refuel. Without hesitation, Hutchinson swung the submarine into position for a stern shot. 3 torpedoes roared from the tubes, the crew counting seconds in their heads as they strained to hear the result. 2 explosions boomed across the water. The second was devastating, striking amidships with such force that the tanker's frame seemed to burst apart. The blast was far greater than anyone had expected. Flames shot skyward in a towering column nearly 200 feet high. Burning crude spread across the water's surface, turning the waves into sheets of fire. The target was identified as the Convoy, a medium-sized oil tanker now transformed into a floating inferno. The blaze was so bright it illuminated Conning Tower like a stage spotlight, making her an easy silhouette against the night. Hutchinson didn't linger to admire the destruction. If there were any escorts nearby, they now knew exactly where to look. Any patrol aircraft within range would be homing in on the fireball like moths to a lantern. He ordered an immediate dive, and the Rasher slid beneath the surface, leaving the burning wreck behind. This was the second major strike in just weeks, and the crew's confidence was climbing, but so were the risks. By early January 1944, Rasher had a new captain, Lieutenant Commander Willard LaFawn, 39 years old and recently transferred from anti-submarine patrol duty off Bermuda, now stood at her helm. LaFawn understood that he was leaving behind calm Atlantic waters for one of the most dangerous arenas. In the Pacific, the South China Sea was a predator's hunting ground, but it was also where hunters often became prey. His first mission was not a direct attack but a different kind of strike. On the night of January 3rd, Rasher slipped silently into the shallow coastal waters near Pulo Condor in the Mekong Delta. There, the crew quickly and efficiently planted 11 Mark 12 magnetic mines in a busy shipping channel. Working in such shallows was nerve. The patrol boats in the area were frequent, and if Rasher was spotted, she would have almost no room to maneuver or dive to safety. But the operation went off without a hitch, and the submarine backed away into deeper water. Then came new intelligence. A Japanese convoy had left Singapore and was expected to pass through Rasher's patrol area within a day. Orders were clear: intercept and destroy. Lafon would not be working alone. The submarine Bluefish, commanded by George Porter, would coordinate the attack. The two boats rendezvoused without difficulty, and by dusk on January 4th, they were ready. The hours stretched on, but just after nightfall, black shapes appeared against the faint glow of the horizon. It was a long line of tankers and freighters, shielded closely by armed destroyers. Lafon moved first, edging into firing range like a wolf slipping between shadows. He loosed 3 torpedoes at the third ship in the formation, but almost immediately, one malfunctioned, detonating only 400 yards from Rasher. The sudden flash lit up the ocean and exposed her position. Within seconds, the convoy's escorts opened fire, tracers streaking across the waves in bright, deadly arcs. Lafon reacted instantly, swinging the submarine hard and bringing the stern tubes into position for another strike. The target was perfectly lined up, but before the shot could have its full effect, another torpedo in the water went off too soon. The sudden blast sent a blinding flash across the sea and a bone-rattling shockwave through Rasher's hull. The crew steadied themselves in the dim red lighting of the control room, ears still ringing. Before they could regroup, fortune turned in their favor. Out of the blackness, one of the Japanese vessels, a massive 10,000-ton ship named Kiam, crossed right in front of Rasher's bow. The enemy's maneuver had handed Lafon an ideal firing position without him having to adjust course. The Japanese crew had no idea that their ship had just drifted into the jaws of a hunter. Lafon wasted no time. In quick succession, 6 torpedoes roared out of Rasher's tubes, leaving streaking wakes in the moonless water. 2 were duds, failing to arm themselves in all too common flaw of the Mark 14s, but the others ran straight and true. The ocean lit up as 2 torpedoes slammed into Kiyomaru's side, ripping open her hull with a deep, concussive roar that seemed to split the night. Flames leaped up the ship's superstructure, throwing frantic shadows across her decks. Men scrambled in panic, some leaping into the churning sea to escape the inferno. Through the haze and smoke, another prize came into view. Hako Maru. The ship was trying to flee southward, her stern already wreathed in flame. Lafon recognized an opportunity and swung Rasher into a long looping arc to overtake the burning vessel. This enduring maneuver brought him ahead of her projected path, allowing a fresh strike from a favorable angle. For torpedoes, shot from Rasher's tubes, to detonating prematurely, but the remaining pair tore into Hako Maru with a crushing force, already badly wounded from earlier hits by Bluefish. The tanker succumbed in a final, cataclysmic blast that tore her apart and sent fragments raining into the waves. The scene was confusion itself. In the darkness and chaos, ships were misidentified, torpedo trails overlapped, and no one could be certain who had struck what. When the fighting died down, Lafon and Porter brought Rasher and Bluefish to the surface, signaling across the black water to sort out the results. They quickly pieced it together. Bluefish had delivered the final blow to Hako Maru, while Rasher had destroyed Kiyomaru. A third tanker, heavily damaged, had somehow escaped. Into the night, there was no counterattack, no depth charge pursuit. The convoy had been taken completely by surprise, hammered from both sides, and whatever ships survived fled without hesitation. Inside Rasher, the crew slumped into their stations. The torpedo reserves were almost empty, and every man was worn down from the long hours of stalking, maneuvering, and firing. But the boat was intact, and their morale was high. Even so, they all knew the ocean would call them back soon, and it did only weeks later. They would be chasing a new quarry in a different stretch of sea, on a night that would make every earlier victory seem small by comparison. On August 4, 1944, Rasher was patrolling off Luzon. She had been on station less than a day when the danger came not from enemy fire, but from within her own hull. Her target that day was Shirazan Maru, a 4,739 passenger and cargo ship. Rasher moved silently into firing position, and a spread of torpedoes was readied in the forward room. But in that compartment, a single moment's lapse turned a strike into a crisis. The torpedoman on duty kept his hand on the purge valve just a second too long. That was all it took for seawater to rush into the line like a battering ram, blasting into the forward torpedo room in a deafening roar. The bow flooded instantly, sending Rasher into a steep, uncontrolled dive. Lights flickered and dimmed as the hull screamed under the mounting pressure. She plunged past 300 feet, beyond her designed safe limit. Still descending, she passed 400 feet, a depth at which other Gothoglass subs had been lost to the crushing weight of the sea. At 500 feet, Rasher was skimming the threshold of implosion. Commander Hank Munson made a snap decision: every ballast tank was to be blown immediately. It was a dangerous call. If the angle was wrong, the rush of compressed air could rupture the bulkheads. But it was the only chance they had. The maneuver worked. The sub's dive slowed, then halted, and Rasher leveled out just above crush depth. The forward compartment was flooded, but the hull had held. The boat had survived by the narrowest of margins. Munson didn't bother writing up the malfunction. There was no time for paperwork when the war still demanded action. Just 10 days later, the same crew found themselves staring down the largest target group they had ever encountered. Shortly after midnight on August 17th, Rasher's radar screen lit up with contacts: an enormous Japanese convoy, codenamed HI-71, steaming toward the Philippines. More than 20 vessels moved together in the formation, including the 20,000 escort carrier Tayo and the 17,000-ton troop transport Tiamaru. For Rasher, it was a hunter's dream. For Japan, it was an irreplaceable lifeline of men, fuel, and supplies. Munson shadowed the convoy, sliding into position along its flank. The weather turned in their favor. Typhoon churned the sea, reducing surface visibility to nothing. The swells boiled around Rasher, but the storm provided perfect cover. At 10:09 p.m., 2 stern torpedoes streaked toward the oiler Teo Maru. Moments later, the ship was engulfed in a massive gasoline-fed fireball that roared skyward, its light piercing the storm clouds like a second sun. The enemy escorts, blinded by rain and spray, fired wildly into the dark. Munson seized the moment, reloading as quickly as possible. He swung Rasher around for a bow shot and fired 6 torpedoes into the massive ships. 3 struck Tiamaru in rapid succession, tearing the transport apart and sending her to the bottom. Another missed its intended target but slammed into a vessel farther back in the formation. Then 3 more torpedoes from the stern hammered Tayo. The carrier rolled and went under quickly, taking hundreds of sailors with her. The destruction was almost beyond belief. In less than an hour, Rasher had turned a heavily defended convoy into a drifting graveyard. Along with Tiamaru and Teo, several other ships including the 542-ton Akimaru were sunk or left crippled. The night's toll came to over 52,000 tons destroyed, a record-breaking strike for a single patrol. But Rasher's mission was not finished. She still had to survive the return trip, dodge searchers, and bring her crew home. When she finally reached base, the numbers spoke for themselves: 18 confirmed kills. 99,901 tons of enemy shipping sunk. She had survived torpedo malfunctions, dodged destroyers, and faced down her own near destruction, yet she had returned, every time, to strike again. The crew knew they had been part of something that would be remembered long after the war ended. In the quiet after the battle, as Rasher glided home across a dark and empty sea, the men aboard knew they had done more than just sink ships. They had struck a blow that would echo far beyond the waves. Every man had faced moments when a single mistake or a twist of fate could have ended them, yet together they had turned those nights into victories. They were tired, they were tested, but they were alive. For them, the war was far from over, but they also knew that history would remember what Rasher had done in those waters, on those nights when courage, skill, and luck had all sailed under the same